this episode of the Lehigh Valley with Love podcast. I'm your host, George Wacker, and today we sit down with meteorologist Mark Shanaberger of TrueWeather. You might remember him from his 10 plus years on WFMZ. He was a television meteorologist for almost 15 years. And we learn about how he got into it, what initially got him interested in weather in general. We talk about technology advancements. We talk about what you should do if you're looking to get into it. We talk about what happens when you get it wrong and how great it is when you get it right. I want to make sure that we thank our sponsors, Molly's Irish Grill and Sports Pub, where we actually recorded this episode on location. You can watch the video. We have the link in the show notes. ArtsQuest, and of course, Michael Bernadyn with Remax Realty. This episode was really interesting, and if you're listening to it as it dropped, it's on the eve of a big storm that's coming through, so we talk about that as well. Again, Mark Shanaberger with TrueWeather, and you can find out more information about them in our show notes, truewx.com. Let's get to it. All right, we're back on location. We're here. We're at Molly's Irish Grill and Sports Pub in South Bethlehem, and I'm so excited to have Mark Shanaberger on, formerly of WFMZ, which is where I first met you, but now the content project coordinator at TrueWeather. And we've been, I think, throwing this back and forth at each other for a while during COVID, trading some messages on LinkedIn and like tweets and stuff. And so it's nice to see you in person and to be people, when you hear this now, we're a day before, there's a big weather event coming in, so maybe even, it won't be that quick. That weather will probably be gone by the time you listen to this, but it's fun to hear about. So thank you so much for coming out. How's it going?
It's going great, yeah. A beautiful day. I just had a conversation with our chief meteorologist, and he's sitting outside. I hear the birds chirping behind him.
Right.
And he's like, I don't know how we're forecasting for this tomorrow. Yeah. It's just insane because it's like 60 degrees out. It's sunny. People are outside, and then tomorrow we're going to get 6 inches of snow.
This wasn't one of my scripted questions, but does it seem like, I don't know, maybe it's just because I'm paying more attention to it. Does it seem like some of these weather events are more common now? Like we're in March, like almost mid-March, and it's like 6 inches, however many inches of snow might come.
Right, yeah. So, these events always happen. The extremeness of them, I think, are more common now. There's a number of things that are happening. People say like these events these events never happened in the past. And I won't say they never happened in the past. What I will say is that we've got more people in more locations. And what's that one thing that everybody has in their back pocket or their side pocket? And that's a phone, and they're taking pictures of everything. And so it's right in our face more than it ever has been. I think a lot of these events have happened. I think if there's one type of event that happens more than what we saw in the past, it's flash flooding.
Right, and that's been devastating for not just our area, but a lot of, you see it.
Just overdevelopment, not proper runoff. And when you have, rain that was going into a field years ago, that's now on pavement and rushing down to the river, it's tough not to get into those situations. But
good. So, I want to start from the beginning with you.
Sure.
I know you're a Penn State grad, but where did you originally, do you have a memory of when you originally were like, I'm kind of interested in weather? Like, this is something that appeals to me.
Yeah, so I grew up just outside of Wilkes-Barre in Dallas, Pennsylvania.
All right. I'm from up in that way. I'm up from Honesdale.
Oh, yeah,
District 2.
Okay,
right.
Yeah. So I grew up there. We were in the back mountain, and our house was kind of nestled in between mountains. And so when thunderstorms came through there, it rattled the home. And it always was curious to me why we saw, kind of clouds building around us and that kind of stuff. My father was an engineer.
Okay.
And so initially when I went to college, I went to Drexel, and I went to Drexel for civil engineering because I said, I like being outdoors, but I like engineering. Well, after a year and a half at Drexel and doing a co-op with PennDOT, I decided, you know what, I really have this passion for weather. So let's chase that, because it's kind of like golf to me. It's something that you can contain for short periods of time, but you never truly have a good handle on it.
Right,
like
we're going to talk about that.
Yeah, your golf game is always something, oh man, I got a par, and the next hole you're 3 or 4 over, double bogeying it. And so I feel like you can contain it at times, and we've gotten into a situation here where it's far more containable than it's ever been. But the thrill of weather to me was trying to predict something that seems very unpredictable.
It's really interesting. And then, so you go to Drexel. I know that you eventually wound up at Penn State.
Right.
What, for somebody who's interested, and we'll probably talk about some, there's like, I don't want to say, I get like homebrew meteorologists and these people who are also getting really into it.
Yeah.
What kind of education do you need? We talked about engineering, you have that background, but if somebody's looking to get into weather at all, what can they kind of expect in that?
Science and math. Science and math. I mean, meteorology is essentially, what you're doing is engineering the atmosphere. You're an engineer of the atmosphere, essentially. In fact, environmental engineers and meteorologists are very, very similar in a lot of things that they do. So there is kind of a crossover there. But yeah, science and math. When I was at Penn State, I'd look across, and in my math classes, I was there with mathematicians, and in my physics class, I was there with, physicists.
What was your ultimate degree then? Is it a degree in meteorology?
So I have a degree in meteorology. I have a bachelor's in meteorology, and then
you have a software development.
Yes, right? And so then I went back to school when I was at WFMZ for a master's in software engineering, because I felt like there was so much with weather that wasn't being tapped into. And in large part, I think my being on the air, being somebody that people can approach and talk to about weather, kind of opened my eyes to, wait a second, we're not giving them all the answers that we could, and hearing the questions that they were asking wasn't being answered by a high temperature of 70 degrees today.
Right. Okay.
And so,
what kind of questions were people looking for?
Well, when you think about it yourself, when you ask a question like, "What's the weather going to be like?" You're not really asking, "Oh yeah, there's a high of 72 degrees." And
you're right. Yeah. Like, can I drive somewhere? Like, give me the. I got.
Yeah. And it's going to be partly sunny skies. You're asking me, "Can I get outside with my kids this week?"
Yes. Yeah.
That's what you're asking. There are two different questions. The way that meteorologists give that back to people is in a manner that says, here are the parameters. Here are the numbers. There's a 75% chance of rain. Well, what does that mean to you?
There's a 25% chance of not rain? I don't know.
Well, yeah. But what you're more interested in is how do I have to put up a tent for my outside party this weekend or not? That's what you're interested in. You don't really care about the parameters, so to speak. You care about how it's going to impact you.
And listen, this is recorded. I hate to date something, when we're recording it, but this is the day before the St. Patrick's Day parade. It's supposed to be in Bethlehem, and it's canceled because Saturday and Sunday forecasted just horrendously, and that's what people are using. And they're like, hey, they ask that question, can we have the parade?
Right.
And it's kind of like, no, you shouldn't do it.
Right. Yeah. And so for me, that question of what's the weather going to be like, they don't care if I get in. If I went over to, the city of Bethlehem and said, 36 degrees, they would get down to a point where I gave them information that was usable, but ultimately they're asking me, can we have the parade or can we not?
Yeah.
That's what they're asking me. They can care less about, I shouldn't say they could care less, but they're not as concerned about the parameters that maybe we sometimes give them.
Sure, and I'm the kind of guy, I'm like, can it be that bad? Let's do it.
Right.
But then, there's middle school kids marching. It's not fair to them.
Oh yeah,
it could actually be a health hazard.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You can have slips and falls and accidents on the way there tomorrow. It's hard. One of the things that we specialize in at TrueWeather is pavement information, and so we're talking about usable information. And this is one of the things that really got me interested in this company and kind of moving away from television is because of usable weather. And this is very beneficial to the city of Bethlehem tomorrow for a parade where there's going to be, there's going to be probably 2 to 4 inches of snow accumulating on paved surfaces. Now, if you're a meteorologist, 5 years ago even, and you're looking at this and you're saying, no way. The pavement retains heat. It's sunny out today. It's in the 60s. How are we going to see this? Well, there's other things that go into it. One, you're going to have, an entire overnight period where all that's going to get sucked out. Inanimate objects will obtain that temperature of the air, and not as quickly for pavement, but they will. And so tomorrow, when you have those snowfall rates of a quarter, half inch or more per hour,
it's pretty good.
That's right. That will accumulate. Now, as soon as it slows down, it's going to melt. But you will have accumulation on roadways, and once it starts accumulating, as long as those rates stay relatively high, you're going to continue to see snow accumulate on a surface. So,
and let's take a step back here. You graduate. Is it every? I guess it's a good question because I don't know, because I know there are. When you think of a meteorologist, the layperson is going to think the person on TV, right?
You're right.
And that's probably, I would think, a small percentage of the meteorologists who are in the wild.
Yeah.
So what was it like for you? Did you leave college and go, I would like to get into television? Or, because, that's a whole different animal. You have to be able to do this, be on TV. Yeah. In addition to, did you have to take acting classes? I guess we can talk about that.
No, what do you do? So when I was at Penn State, they have different options for you, and one of the options was broadcasting. Now, I didn't get into any of the options. There was the energy sector, which is huge, the private sector, working for the government. There's a lot of different areas you can go with meteorology, and I didn't really have an option, so I explored all of them a little bit. Probably like the energy sector the most, but
when you say energy sector, what do you
just
mean?
Dealing with temperatures and how much we do a little bit of that at trueWeather, and that's kind of looking at the trends that are coming up, predicting them out, weeks, months, even sometimes years in advance, to give energy companies a good information, good solid information on what they can plan for. With temperatures and how much maybe the grid will be stressed.
I understand.
So whether there'll be more of a demand for natural gases and stuff like that.
Okay. Well, yeah.
So there's a lot to it as far as the energy sector is concerned. But for me, I jumped in front of a camera and people said, "You're pretty good at this," and I said, "But I don't really like it that much." And they said, "Well, you're pretty good at it." And I'm like, "Well, maybe that's because I didn't really care if you liked me on the air or not." And
that's like that secret that you can't, you tell it to someone who does care and they can't figure it out. Yeah.
Right. And so I just kind of did it, and I took off. It took me a couple of years to get into television, but at that point, I kind of that's the direction I chose. Started off, first year and a half was up in northern Maine.
Northern Maine?
Yeah, so it was.
Well, the weather there is just like we don't even do forecasts; it just snowed.
Right. Yeah, and so it's an interesting dynamic up there with the weather. But yeah, when I was up there the first morning, it was 19 below. Now I will say that was the coldest morning of my entire time there. It was the first morning.
Welcoming you to the
right, and it was so dry out and just unbelievably cold, but we had a 39-inch snowfall event up there when I was there, right around Christmas time, and it was a great place. People were great up there, and got my opportunity down here at WFMZ. Just kind of walked in. They had an opening. I'd reached out to Ed Hanna.
Sure.
And he said, "Why don't you come in?" So as soon as I got off the plane, we went over there, and They offered me a job that day, and the rest was history. Like once I got to WFMZ, it was the flooding of 2006 in June.
I remember that.
Real bad flooding.
I remember that because my niece was like a year old, and my brother was 10 years older than me. He's like, well, this flooding is crazy. Like, we went down by Moravian, there's a cement company back there, and it was just, there were guys on the roof that are like, well, you can't get out. And I remember that. It was wild.
Yeah, and I can remember, one, being up in northern Maine and saying to the anchor on the show, because I actually co-anchored it with him.
Okay.
And I said to him, I don't know what I'm walking into. And he said, yeah, well, he thought I was talking about, he started giving me a pep talk. He's like, oh, you'll be fine.
They'll like you here.
Don't worry about it. You'll be fine. I'm like, no, there's a stationary front just sitting over, central New Jersey and eastern Pennsylvania. And I said, I may be walking into like major flooding in this area. Like, we're talking 10 to 20 inches of rain.
How many events can I clearly recall from?
Right.
And I remember that distinctly because I'm like, we shouldn't be here. We really, with my 1-year-old niece and my brother, we're watching these floodwaters, and we're kind of like, I think it might be time to not be around this area.
Yeah, and so I can remember them. I came in. Matt Broderick was going to show me the ropes that morning, and they said, hey, you're okay on the air. We don't have an issue with that. Can you work tonight? Okay. I'm like, yeah, sure. So I worked flood coverage through the overnight period on the AccuWeather channel and 69 News. And so, yeah, the first day I was there, I was on the air.
Well, let's talk about Ed and Hannah for a second. I have 2 stories real quick. The one time I think I met you, or maybe it was a different time that I was in there for something. But in my former job, we put together a video, and it was about the people that we love in the Lehigh Valley, and number 1 was Ed Hannah. This is like 2000, like 2013, 2012.
Right.
And he played it on air, right? Because I think it was part of the marketing of it. We were kind of banking on him really liking it, and he played it during the weather forecast. And I never met him. My wife, I hope she doesn't get mad at me, has the biggest crush on Ed. Yeah. And we even met him at Music Fest, and I introduced, I'm like, hey, I'm the guy that did the Valentine's video. He's like, oh, that's great. And I'm like, and my wife loves you. Yeah. And she and like she would usually get embarrassed. She did not get embarrassed. She's like, let's take pictures and all that. So yeah, he, it was a shame he hasn't been on air in a long time, but he was such a figure for such a long time, especially in like weather and such a recognizable face. Yeah, and I worked side by side with Ed for almost a decade. Yeah. So yeah, it was great. He was a great guy. And it sorely missed, I think, in the Lehigh Valley. He was such a big part of every. One of the things you don't realize when you're on the air is how much you're a part of everybody's daily routine. Absolutely. And I didn't realize that until I left, and people had said to me, I get home from work or I get home from school, and I may have had a miserable day. And I turn you and Jim Vaughn and Melanie Falcon and Joy Howe or Julia Rose on, and I just laugh. It's a release. I remember you would wear funny socks and stuff, right? And that, but that's the thing. It's just fun. And FMZ, without going too far down the rabbit hole, it's such because it's so unique in that it's not an affiliate. It's ours. Clearly it's privately owned, but it's Lehigh Valley's. Yeah. And so I think with some of the personalities on there, the people do take a liking to, but kind of that relationship, because we're right down the street, and you're the Lehigh Valley station. Yeah, and it is. I mean, you're in the Philadelphia market, but this is. I mean, a lot of times, if you'd watch some of the Philly stations, it'd be one story in the Lehigh Valley when there's tons of stuff. They're like, hey, we have a thing.
Yeah, we've touched that area, but that's all we're going to do.
We're just trying to get some sponsorship.
Right, and so, and the thing about WFMZ is it is a very family-oriented, family structure. I mean, you think about, local news. It's not often that you have a core. I was there for almost 15 years, and you think about the core starting out in the morning of Matt and Eve and Hasiel. I mean, you're talking.
Look at Hasiel right now.
15 years together.
Hasiel's starring in the Color Purple at the Civic Theater.
Yeah, he's doing great.
Wasn't he on Dancing with the Stars?
Lehigh Valley Stars. Eve did that, and so. And then you go into the evening shows, and Rob and Wendy and Ed and Kathy Crane have been there, forever. And so you don't often get that. And so when I was there for, like I said, almost 15 years, and you have kids telling you that we grew up with you. We started watching you in kindergarten, and now we're freshmen in college, and you're like, I guess that's right. Yeah.
Well, I'm old. But
I mean, and you're not, I'm only in my early 40s, but you're like, I mean, kids grew up watching you, and it becomes intertwined.
And it's that because you're doing your job, right? You're in there, you're doing, and we're going to talk about that. And, I guess you're not always thinking because you're doing your job about the people watching you. But
right.
It's like your forecast could be in a middle of a homeroom, and it's all
just turning it on, and like I said, making it part of your routine, whether it's in the morning, whether it's in the evening, whatever the case may be. Just having that situation where you're used to these people and they really are coming into your home. You laugh with them, you cry with them, you just don't think about that stuff. And then you go over to Music Fest and you see them.
Yeah, and then I'm sure you get people have to come up to you. Yeah. Even now.
Yep. For sure.
Continually. And before we move on to TrueWeather, which we're definitely going to talk about, like when you're a TV, because you're 15 years TV personality. I guess it's easy to think that your job is just when you're on screen and you have the green screen behind you and doing all that. But when you would come into work in the morning, what as a meteorologist are you doing? Like, do you sit down? Like, how does that work? Do you sit down at a computer and bring up software and then start looking at numbers on your own? Like, what do you do?
So for me personally, and I think a lot of meteorologists are this way. Okay. I mean, there's with any job, there's a lot of, and even with the television jobs, whether it's the sports team or the anchors or the reporters, there's a lot that goes on. I mean, it's like an iceberg. The tip is what you see on the air, but there's 90% that goes on, underneath the water. And so that's the same. I sit down at a computer, I'm looking at models, and it's not usually like, I'm picking up from scratch. I'm looking at models constantly.
You're kind of, you always have a sense.
And so there's a constant evolution of a forecast.
Like you're like, I need to keep my eye on that in 2 days. I see it coming this way, and I know in a couple of days I can.
Yeah. So you're constantly watching and evaluating the weather. You're having conversations with people behind the scenes, the other meteorologists and stuff like that. What do you think? I was always a person that, in WFMZ, luckily all the environments that I've been part of have been very democratic in the way that it's not just one person at the top telling you this is what we're going to go with. Okay. It's what are your thoughts?
So what are your thoughts? I saw this and you saw this.
And so I can remember having these conversations where what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts? And in a storm like tomorrow, somebody might be saying, I think it's a 4 to 8, and I think it's a 3 to 6, and I think it's a 1 to 3, and so we say, all right, well, what if we went with this in the middle? Would everybody be comfortable with that? Yeah. Okay, so then that's what we're going to come out with. And so it was always interesting to me when somebody said, oh yeah, Matt's forecast is way better than yours.
Wait a minute.
I mean, maybe the presentation, but the forecast itself was exactly the same. We would laugh about that. It was the same forecast. We made sure of that, especially in my time there. We made a very conscious effort to make sure that not only was the forecast on the air and between meteorologists the same, but it was also on all of our platforms. Because when I got there, the website, it was 2006.
Right. It's kind of
websites like were like a lot of televisions didn't even have a website really.
Yeah.
And so, or they did, and it was just very archaic. And so the evolution since I've been there of not only that, but like social medias and apps and stuff like that. I mean, the iPhone wasn't even out when I started there. So like, it's just.
We're about the same age. So yeah, I feel that. And with I mean, this has to be somewhat of it. Let's talk about when you get it wrong, or when people perceive you get it wrong. Because you're not saying, hey, this is 1,000% happening, unless there are some things that you're like for safety reasons and all that. So how do you deal with that when maybe you got it wrong, or just people disagree with you? Like, do you have to have a thick skin? Do you kind of like develop? Like, do they teach you about that? Because I would imagine it's got to be part of the job. Or people are like, hey, what are you doing?
Yeah, I mean, it tends to be a very thankless job. So when you do get it right, you were supposed to, and when you don't get it right,
they're like, good job. This is your job.
You're an idiot 50% of the time.
It's almost like a professional athlete in a way, right?
Yeah, you better hit that 3-point shot at the end of the game, because if you don't,
what are you getting paid?
Yeah,
right.
So I mean, it is very much one of those things where you do have to have a thick skin. I think the biggest problem for me is when you get into these events, you know what you expected to happen at certain points. You had those benchmarks within the event. And so when they're not occurring, you're like, uh-oh.
Yeah,
I know this isn't going to happen sooner than they do.
Which means, if X isn't happening, then maybe Z is not going to happen in 4 hours.
Right. And so I think, I get it. I mean, people are, again, we talked about this at the very beginning. They're planning their days.
Right. They're like, thanks, man.
Right.
Like, thanks, Mark. I was planning to go out with my family, and now it's raining.
Yeah.
And it's your fault that this happened.
Right. And so, yeah. And so, yeah, you get it. I mean, they're not. They're asking you, how are we going to be impacted? And when I'm asking you that, I want to know: do I have to cancel school today? Do I have to change my plans? Can I have that outdoor picnic? Should I put up a tent? Those kind of things. Or, can I not put up a tent because it's going to be too windy on top of everything else? So you get it. And once you get to that point, I think you're at a much better place. It's tough to, I think one of the tougher things to do is when I get this event wrong, can I still forecast that event right? And so
can I modify in the we've seen this didn't go the way that we expected, and now we're expecting it to go.
To remember that each event is its own unique entity,
right.
And when I often use the analogy of a closer in baseball. Like, I blow the save tonight, I got to come back and save the game tomorrow.
And that's the thankless part of it. You're like, hey, I'm sorry guys, I didn't, but now I'm going to come back full strength.
Right.
I can't feel sorry for myself.
Right. I can't feel sorry for myself. I can't because, I forecasted that last event too little or too much. I can't go in the opposite direction for this event as a result of that last event.
So you said everyone's individual. You need to go.
I have
reset.
To kind of detach myself from that and then move forward with it. And I think that to me was the difference. I mean, when you're talking about television meteorology, you've got 4 minutes, maybe 5 minutes tops in a show to tell a 100 square mile area that this is their forecast for tomorrow. And the difference between that and what I'm doing now is that you can't get super specific. I can't tell you. I mean, I can tell you what's going to happen in my main cities.
Like if this table's the Lehigh Valley, you're in Bethlehem might get this, and Albertus might not even see that.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I can get far more specific. I can talk about, pavement temperatures, which pavement accumulations and stuff like that for specific areas. Because as you know, it's different. When you go across this valley, I mean, a lot of times on the air, I would have to put the valley in the same, 3 to 6 or 2 to 4. With trueWeather, I don't have to do that. I can make this zip code different than this zip code.
I remember I was driving back from Avoca airport, and we got to go through the Lehigh Tunnel, and it was just, this is like the late 90s or something.
Yeah.
And it was all snow, and then you went through the tunnel and you came on the other side, nothing. And in my brain, I was a teenager at the time. I'm like, that's pretty neat. I'm like, it's the valley and all that.
Yeah.
But those kind of things are, it could be a neighboring town just through that.
Yeah, and so, there could be a neighboring town across that mountain. Blue Ridge and Blue Mountain, that's, there's vastly different. And especially for, this Philadelphia market where you have the Poconos to the north, then you got the Lehigh Valley, and then you get into like some coastal plains as you get down into parts of New Jersey. And so it's just, the differences there are drastic, just for a regular event that's moving through, let alone a snow event.
So TV was good to you. 15 years is a long time to do anything.
Right.
This is where we're going to talk about trueWeather. So what was kind of your impetus? Did you say, hey, we talked about being thankless, and before we went on air, we talked about even like meteorologists sometimes having higher rates of depression, or at least it's like a common thing. What was your reasoning to say, I love FMZ, but it's time for me to move on?
Yeah, I think that's depression is something that's been well talked about in the community of meteorology.
When you say it, I didn't even think about it.
In a lot of jobs, you get a pat on the back. In this job, it's very often
people yelling at you.
Right, and if you got it right, you were supposed to, and if you got it wrong, you're a moron. And so, for me, it wasn't necessarily that as much as it was being able to do more with weather. There's so much out there that's underutilized. Like I said, when we talk about a snow event like tomorrow, where it's going to impact the area, again, you're not asking me how much snow is going to accumulate on grassy surfaces. You're asking me, can I get around the Lehigh Valley to do what I want to do tomorrow? I don't care if 3 inches or 6 inches accumulates on grassy surfaces. I care about if 3 to 6 inches is going to accumulate on paved surfaces.
In my neighborhood.
Right. So I can't drive or I can't get out. That's what you're really concerned about. And so changing the mind thinking of how weather is presented and how weather is consumed, I guess. Like when I say 3 to 6 inches and I'm on the air, a lot of times it would be, 3 to 6 inches is going to accumulate everything. Not all surfaces are the same. But that's just one aspect of it. We're not talking about whether agriculture or whether sports teams or events. And there's so many different, everybody uses weather. You go to a supermarket, that's
you're almost
the one thing that you hear everywhere.
You're that inner kid who saw that thunderstorm was kind of like looking at trueWeather going, look what I can do with all
this. I have all these parameters, can we do this? And some of the things that we've talked about at trueWeather was, now that we've gotten fairly good at predicting pavement accumulations, let's start talking about the next thing, and whether that is, how do we help our contractors, because that's a large part of what we do is landscaping, snow removal companies. How do we get to that next step of saying, all right, here's what we have, and this is what we're forecasting on pavement. Should you put down brine? What type of brine and salt, and what type of brine and salt should you be putting down, and all that other good stuff that's out there that is specific to an industry. But industries out there aren't being touched by the weather community in the way that they should be.
Quick aside, I drove into Allentown this morning for a meeting, and as I'm driving in, you see the brine lines on the ground, and it's beautiful. But because I knew I was coming to meet you, I'm like, that's something to talk. Like we see this beautiful weather, but here are people who are informed. Like we've we've reached this, we're human beings, we've reached this level of information that we know something's coming even though this weather is beautiful and we're already preparing for it.
Yeah, and just, I mean, I'm new to this side of, this private sector, this dealing with, landscapers and snow removal companies. So the information that I found in the last year from them is that, this brine or this salt can basically, cut off a quarter to a half inch on the front end, and then if I put it down on the back end, I can get rid of maybe a quarter to a half inch depending on the situation. That certain products will cause binding to the roads and actually do the opposite of what you want them to do. Tomorrow is an event where we're going to have, in most locations, a little bit of rain beforehand. So is that brine going to wash away? And, those are all different things that are, I think we can get to a better place with the parameters that we have out there, with the knowledge that we have out there, with the forecasting tools, get to a better place than where we are right now, which is this kind of a stab in the dark. And so going to people that are dealing with this in the industries and saying, what are we not addressing with you? That to me is really what fuels my fire.
Yeah, it would make sense to me if I'm a contractor, landscaper, and I'm running, I'm deploying whatever I need to deploy out there. I would want, and no offense to any TV meteorologists, I guess they're on the Weather Channel, but they only have that 3 to 4 minutes of whatever, and like I need specific information about this. Is that what? So let's talk about TrueWeather. We waited long enough. So is that what TrueWeather does? Can you describe what that platform is?
Yeah, and that's exactly what we do. Is pavement accumulations. We give you first and second inch timing on pavement. We give you initial accumulation on pavement. So all that information is very, very important to them because when you're talking about an event like tomorrow where some locations are not going to see an inch and can get away with just de-icing for this event. They could just put down salt or brine and get away with that for this event. And other locations are going to have to actually drop the plow. Now the difference can be 4 to 5 times the amount of employees that they have to bring in for an event where they're going to have to shovel or plow compared to an event where they're just going to de-ice. That's huge money, especially when you're talking about gas prices where they are, people getting in, getting out.
If I don't have to send an extra truck, that's hundreds of dollars in gasoline.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're going to be running that truck tomorrow in many locations for, 10 to 14 hours maybe. And so that's a lot of...
So is that what is it mostly, if you can describe like what TrueWeather itself is, like there's a me factor, I can just go there and look at weather, but then there's that detailed... If I'm a contractor, an owner of a landscaping company, I can get a very detailed for whatever I'm looking at.
Right, and so basically the gist of what we do is we're going to give you parameters that are specific to your zip code. So like we talked about, I'm not forecasting Bethlehem for Allentown. A lot of times they're going to be very similar, but there's going to be a difference between Allentown and Bethlehem. And so you having that knowledge that I need to have my crews on this side at this time or this side at this time, you're saving money on labor, you're saving money on gas, you're letting your crews maybe sleep a little bit longer before a long duration
all
event.
These things accumulate.
There's
a weather term.
Right. Yes,
but it does, right?
You're very happy about the dad joke.
I know, I'm very. But if you get those, but I'm just like, if you can plan for that, I can see how it can be so valuable.
And so we have contractors that'll say, we look at the app, we look at the local television station.
We ask Alexa.
Fine. Right, that's fine. You want to do that, that's fine. If you're getting away with it and you're successful with it, by all means do it.
Sure, yeah.
There are many companies out there
but here's this, I guess the point is the information you talked about, like the passion for you to go in and all that education, now, because the internet is evolved to the point where, we can give you that information now in a way that isn't overwhelming.
Right.
But our professionals can do it, condense it for you, and give it to you something usable and not like, it might snow.
Right.
And it's a 40% chance at 11. What does that mean?
Well, I mean, think about it just in the sense of how much, brine and salt. We heard about that last year. There was a shortage on salt. And so when you're talking about these things that you might not only not want to put down or have to put down, but they're also in short supply.
Yeah.
And you go and waste it on an event that maybe you didn't need. Our platform can save you time, save you money, and pay for itself basically by telling you, hey, you're not going to have to put down salt or brine for this event, because even though it's going to snow, rates are never going to get that high. Snowfall rates per hour are never going to get that high, and the temperatures are going to be high enough that it's never going to accumulate on the roadways, or if it does, it's very little. So that can be a huge difference for especially the smaller guy. It's weird to me that the bigger companies use this, but sometimes the smaller guys like, I can't afford you, and it should actually be the opposite way. It should be the smaller guy.
If you use me, that I get it.
Right.
Because I'm just like I'm a smaller company.
Right.
Like I can pay you X, but I could probably save a lot.
Yes.
More than it would hurt my bottom line. It would help my bottom line more.
Right. Yeah. And so it's cool seeing it. Everything coming to fruition. As far as that goes, and us bringing in new tools, we were talking about the difference between plowing an event and just putting down salt or brine, and the difference in manpower that brings in. One of the things that we're working on is the probability of actually 1 inch accumulating, and so we give you that timing right now, but hey, it's weather, and sometimes it does not happen the way that we projected, or it happens later, or it happens earlier, or we're just barely getting above an inch. And so in those situations, like through New Jersey tomorrow, where you're talking, central New Jersey, you're talking maybe, an inch to 2 inches, or, an inch and a half to 3 inches. They may not get to 2 inches, and so they may only get over an inch. And so that's those areas are really where we're focusing on, because those are locations where we're talking about whether I bring in 10 guys or 40 guys.
Right. And especially during a time in mid-March where we're not in January, we're kind of expecting to have to
sun angle, temperatures, all that stuff is going to come into factor tomorrow. And for these guys, that's a huge difference in the labor costs, and the fact that they may not even have the labor right now. I mean, there's a labor shortage on top of everything else. So they may not even have that. So if they're going to call in these guys and they're going to spend this money, it's really important that they have the proper information. And like I said, we're focusing on snow removal and contractors and landscapers, but there's so many different industries out there.
I'm not going to put them on blast, but if I was like a music festival, for example, I would like to have the most updated stuff, because it can affect my decision to cancel a concert or something like that.
So there's so many different arenas, so to speak, that you can get into with this that are just, it hasn't been given the attention that it should.
And does it help? I mean, it's kind of a personal question, but personally, not being on TV, I could imagine that could also be good family-wise. You get more time, or maybe you have less. I don't know. But it's just I would imagine you have some more time to spend with your family.
There's
David disagree.
So let's put it this way: there's more home time.
Yeah.
There's not necessarily more quality home time.
I think I'm in the same boat. I'm upstairs working, and then but I'm still.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people thought when I left television, good for you. You're gonna have this. I mean, listen, I had a posh gig in television. All right. I mean,
now you don't have to. The only thing you don't have to do is go on TV, but you're doing the same.
Right. Hat off weekends at this point. I had my shift. It was nice. This is nonstop. I mean, you know how it is. When you have a business or a smaller business, you're constantly working. You're constantly thinking about ideas. Your brain never stops. And so even if it does, it's always kind of on that back burner, where that's with a smaller company. I think any smaller business.
And there's competition in your space too. Like, let's be honest. There's been, I don't want to call them armchair, but like I'm familiar with some even independent. We've worked with Lehigh Valley Weather Authority, who's friends of ours. People who are very interested in the same things you were interested in, and they do a great job. I understand.
Yeah.
But like that has become popular as well. And I think that's interesting to see some of those pages. They blow my page out of the water with likes. You know what I mean? Like it's so many people.
And again, that's weather. You start talking about weather. I
start the Lehigh Valley weather report. I'm like, I don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, and so there's a lot of them out there, and with that, I think of Good Will Hunting. That scene in Good Will Hunting where the guy from Harvard comes in and Matt Damon's character says, "I've learned everything I needed in $50 worth of late fees at the library." Yeah, and they have more knowledge than that.
Sure, yeah.
They're very knowledgeable, and
yes.
They do, honestly, a lot of them do a great job with explaining it. And I think one thing that maybe there was a disconnect with some meteorologists and what you're talking about on social media is that a lot of those people are they can communicate very well. They're better at adapting to people, and so it's given them an opportunity to touch some people in a different way and get more specific to location or whatever the case may be.
And sometimes they're just fun pages to go on because everyone's fighting with each other. And then the owner of the page is like, he's mad, and they'll shut down the comments. But again, it's just like, how? We're talking about weather, right? I feel like I'm talking about practice. Like we're talking about weather, and it's just something that is never going away. And so, but our information and the way that we can get it is just going to improve. So that's why it's so interesting to me as you're progressing.
Right. Yeah, and it's gotten light years better. The one thing I always say to anybody who's looking at a forecast is look at it as a guideline, not gospel. You know what I mean? It's to give you the best information that we currently have, and it's gotten way better than it was.
Well, can you talk about one of the questions? We haven't even looked at these in a while. Can you talk about when you started 15, 16, 17 years ago compared to now? What is the technology? Is it like book to iPhone? Like what has it been for you? The advancement.
Well, the advancement. I mean, there's hard metrics out there on this that we're talking the way we talked about 10, 15 years ago, a 1 day or 1.5, 2 day forecast. We're talking about a day 4, 5, 6 forecast right now. The accuracy levels of those two forecasts.
More years of having data?
Faster computers, better models. Every time we get an event wrong, don't think we're just like, not me personally, but the people who deal with these models, they ain't happy.
Well, it's like you're getting better.
They're reading it out.
I don't want to say you're reading tea leaves because it's more of a science than that, but you're getting better at reading those.
Right. And so what do we miss here? What do we have to improve on? So every single time an event like that happens where there's a miss here or there's a miss here. And again, think about, this is not something that you may not be familiar with, but a lot of times when we were looking at the models years ago, they were 50 or 100 kilometers, and there's still a lot out there that are that resolution, but now there's ones that are 1 kilometer, there's ones that are 3 kilometer, and so now we're getting more precise with this, and as the models continue to get better and more precise,
you could tell, like, for example, City Allentown over a 3-6 kilometer radius.
We can tell you Allentown instead of the Lehigh Valley.
Yeah, and that's what I think that's the difference.
Right.
That's where the not that anyone's better or worse, but just having that quick forecast compared to what's going on in downtown. Like I need to know.
Right, and there's one thing that I like to look at a lot of times. It's called positive snow depth, and what this makes you think about is that what are the models really showing you when they're showing you they're showing you a snowfall accumulation. But they're not showing that's not what they're showing you. What they're showing you is how much snow is going to fall from the sky in the form of snow in that many inches.
Okay.
So it's a different mindset than what's going to actually accumulate on the surface.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying?
I understand, yeah.
So your positive snow depth is actually what's going to accumulate on a surface that's 32 degrees in that situation. I don't think, or what you get what I'm saying. Whenever the surface is 32 degrees, that accumulation begins. But it wasn't always looked at that way. Everybody said, "Oh, the models are saying 3 to 6, and that's what it is."
It's black and white. It's
right.
Snow, no snow. 3 inches, no 3 inches. When you're talking about precision, that's what you're getting into logistics, right?
Right.
Okay. Again, we talked about should we get ready to deploy the plows, and do we need some? Yeah, and that type of stuff now. Just even disseminating that information 10 years ago would be a lot more difficult, or 15 years ago, the way that you can do.
It's funny. I'm going to wait for a week or two after we have this conversation, because whenever I have this conversation with somebody and I start telling them look at weather a little bit differently, and think about things that are underutilized and things that you've often said, man, I wish we had information on this, or I wish I had this. I will often have friends or people that I've talked to write me a text message or send me an email or something like that and say, hey, you were telling me about this, and now I was thinking about this. Is this something that you could look at? And I'll be like, yeah, absolutely. That's something. And
do you still get text messages from friends who are like, hey, I read the weather report, what really was happening?
Yeah.
Are you just kind of like, guys, stop?
No. Yeah, my friends, family, they'll often write me, and I'll be like, what are they saying? Well, my mom, it's funny, my mom always just said,
no, I'm not
they're saying, and I said, I'm part of them. Do you want to know what I want to say? And she would be like, yeah, what are you saying? That's really what I'm asking. So, there's a ton of people that ask me still, and I think my mother has been a good hype man. So, for family members, they kind of filter through her, and so, so she'll give that information out to whoever. But it's.
Do you miss TV at all? I'm sure you miss your team. That had to be fun. Working with all those people you mentioned. Melanie Falcon. Everybody's so great.
Yeah, Melanie, Jim, Dan, Matt, Eve, Hasiel, Rob, Wendy, Will Lewis,
who's now in North Carolina. Yeah, I'm trying to convince him to go to a Bobcats Sixers game with me one day.
Yeah, that'd be great. There's Bo, Jackie was there.
The best dressed man we have.
Yeah, oh my gosh, I can't compete with him. And so, you miss those people. I was in a unique situation. I started 2 shows with Jim and Melanie while I was there. I don't know that that's ever happened from scratch. A team starting 2 new shows, and then to be able to have worked at one point on every single one of the shows that were there, every single week. I don't know that there's anybody that can say that either, besides me. I was not on the morning show as a permanent fixture, but I was behind the scenes with Matt for an extended period of time, and so I got to work on every single show at WFMZ at one point or another. And that was my permanent show. So I got to work with literally everybody there that you've seen for an extended period of time. Kathy Crane,
she's a Lehigh Valley legend.
She still comes to my kids' birthday parties. Still gets gifts for my kids at Christmas. Love her to death. So she's great, and there's so many great people that work at that station. So
we kind of finish up here. We're gonna plug TrueWeather again, but if somebody listening is because I know there are probably more younger people exposed to meteorology now than even in the past, because they can get on their phone and download apps and do all sorts of things. For somebody who maybe is interested in it and is looking to either go to school or what are some, besides going to college to learn about it, what advice would you give them as they begin their journey?
Take one thing that I did when I was even in high school, and I wasn't the A+ student, but I took all the AP classes, and AP Physics, AP Chemistry, AP Math. So take all of those science and math classes you can, get your hands on all of them because you're going to need all of them. And the number one thing I would say to anybody that wants to get into meteorology and predicting weather is don't be afraid to fail, because you're going to fail. That's the nature of the business. And even as we get better, it's just going to be smaller increments that you're failing at. It's going to be maybe 1 out of 100 at some point, or 1 out of 1,000.
There's got to be a thrill in looking at those models and being like, my gut tells me this one. This is what I'm doing. And then when you get it right, I mean, I know you said fail, but there's got to be that thrill when you do get it right, and you're like, it's going like it got exactly 4 inches at the marker that I had set.
Well, one of the
you're like busting your wife's throat and be like, I got it.
Yeah. And so this one was a perfect example of that. I mean, we've been. Our company for days now has been forecasting for this snow, and there's been a lot of weather entities that have said like, hey, I just don't see this happening. It's going to be too far west. We're like, nope, we're seeing it come east. We're seeing it come east. And so one thing, social media is great because it keeps receipts. Yeah. It's great when you have situations like this.
Because you even remember when
but then when you get it wrong, you're like,
forget that I did that.
Right, yeah. But yeah, I mean, we've been saying pretty similar amounts for the Lehigh Valley, most of the East Coast now for several days, and it looks like it's going to come to fruition. So our clients are prepared; they're ready to go.
It shows how important it is, And tell people that let's do the spiel. Tell people more about TrueWeather, how they can find out more about it.
Yeah, it's very easy.
And we're going to link this in our show notes.
Yeah, trueWX.com. You can find us on the web. You can go on there, check out some of our products. We don't have anything for the average show, so to speak. It is a paid service, so you would have to pay for a location. But if you're
getting the team with you on it, what I'm trying to say is it's established. It's established.
We have clientele all over the country. We just got multiple clients in the Seattle area this year. We have Denver. We have Salt Lake City, Great Lakes, Ohio Valley, and then the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic.
Where is it based?
It's based in Allentown.
No, okay. Yeah. I thought it was. That's great.
So
that's even better. Like, just keep pushing that. Yeah.
Yeah. Know that. And so we're based out of Allentown, and so if
awesome.
You're listening to this, we're local, but we're also national, and we have a plan to move into Canada. So we're going to expand, and we already have some clients that are begging us to move up there, and so that'll happen in the very near future, hopefully next season or the year after that. A little bit different up there with zip code base because their postal codes are a little bit different, so we got to work on that.
Metric system,
right? Yeah. So that'll be a little bit different, and we'll probably have to expand. How many meteorologists we have at that point.
That's great. I mean, I think I knew that, but to have you say that it's also local even makes me.
Yeah.
But it's great. It makes you feel good.
And one of the things too for us, I mean, not only is it's local, we do this zip code base, but like when you get into events, if you're looking at an app or you're looking at television, a lot of times when you get into the events, it's basically whatever I saw, and that's it. For us, we do what we call live casting, and so we will give them updates if we see a change in the forecast. So we get into the actual event, and we say, wait a second, this band is sitting over this area instead of this area.
So you'd be like 6 in the morning, and you're like,
So in the middle of the night, we're writing you saying, hey, wait a second, that band that we said we're going to set up over the Lehigh Valley is now setting up over Central Bucks, Montgomery. So you guys are going to see as much. You guys are going to see more, and so they know, and we're giving them times. So we're saying like this may change, and so that's in real time that we're looking at that, and that's something that you don't get with a lot of these apps, and I hate to bash what I used to be in, but television meteorology.
And I think people can understand. I mean, it's just a limit. The format is different, right? So
Right, yes.
it's a different animal, and I think people can appreciate it.
And it's in those situations, that's where the
For
payoff
me,
is.
the average Joe, sometimes I'm just
Right.
like, I need it. Okay, it's sunny, good. All right, we're out.
Right.
So, but I see the difference when you need that pinpointed.
Yeah, and so we also have a service that we call Ask a Meteorologist. So at any point in the event, they can write us and say, you know what you're forecasting isn't necessarily happening. It's happening a little bit differently. When is this going to change?
Do you ever get any fun messages through that sometimes? Like, guys.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's some that were like, hey, this is the second time in a row that, maybe this has happened or this happened.
But you're continuing, like you said, you're continually to get better. Every time there's an event, you're just getting better and better.
And so, just a couple of weeks ago, we had a conversation at that event that happened here in the Lehigh Valley where a heavier band set up overnight and 5 inches fell here when I think we were forecasting 1 to 2. It happens to us too. I mean, that's, again, if you're not ready to fail in this business, I'm sorry, you're in the wrong business. You're going to fail. The important part is how do you recover from that and how do you learn from that? And then there's some situations for us that, we get into those situations and we look at ourselves and we're like, what do we do? Because, you're only as good as your tools.
Right, yeah.
And if my tools are
then you got to trust
weather
your
models
instincts a little bit from your experience.
Right.
And rely on, hey, I remember this thing 10 years ago and it kind of was like this and I'm going to do this. Yeah.
And so, even if we're on, an event like what we're talking about a couple of weeks ago, even if we're on the high side and it overperforms the high side of what the models are saying, then you're like, okay, now what do we do? Because there's no way we could go out on a limb and say we're going to go on the high side of the models, but we're not going outside of the model. Like that's a real extreme for us to go to. And so that's when you get into those situations where you're like, what do I do? Now I can live cast that event, but live casting is maybe sometimes already too late. Because it has to be produced for you to do it. So, I mean, there's issues with any type of service that you get.
But I say, like with your service, like I would feel comfortable relying, like, hey, these guys have it handled,
right?
And they're worrying themselves about their own accuracy, so I can take trust in them.
And so, in those situations, you could also say, like, hey, we're now seeing this overperform in this area. We can at least give you an end time and what we expect to see, as opposed to like, hey, we're just throwing up our hands and good luck.
Mark, this is fantastic. I'm so glad that we did this. And again, if you guys want to learn more about TrueWeather, hit up our show notes.
truewx.com.
And we're
find me on LinkedIn.
We'll make sure that we link all your stuff in there. I'm glad that we were able, because I said we've been kicking this around, so I'm glad that we're able to get out. And
LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter. You can find us in all those places, and we have links there too. So make sure you follow us.
This is a great way to finish out my week. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
This is a pleasure.
It's a great time.
All right. One more big thank you to Mark Shanaberger of TrueWeather. Find more information about them at truewx.com. A big thank you to our sponsors, ArtsQuest, Michael Bernadyn with Remax Realty, and of course, Molly's Irish Grill and Sports Pub, where we recorded this. Check out the video in the show notes or on our YouTube. If you want to get in touch with me, it's George at LehighValleyWithLoveMedia.com. We'll talk to you next time.
Looking for a bigger home? Find Mike. Looking to downsize? Find Mike. Looking for a home in the Poconos? Find Mike. Looking for your very own bat cave? Find Mike. When looking to navigate the Lehigh Valley real estate market, the first move is to always find Mike Bernadyn with Howard Schaefer and Associates of Remax Real Estate. He can help you build the right game plan to achieve all your real estate goals. Whether it be a home with 10 bathrooms, a home with a large garage to park your Tesla or vintage Ford Pinto, or just something perfect for you and your family, finding Mike Bernadyn is always the best way to go. So, what are you waiting for? To make all your Lehigh Valley real estate dreams come true, all you have to do is find Mike Bernadyn with Howard Schaefer and Associates of RE/MAX Real Estate.